Hello everyone, and welcome to the Students' Union's Q&A with the President and Michelle Miller as well. So today we're going to have students speaking to the President and Michelle to ask them questions that you wanted to know. The start of the show is going to be Kieran first, Kieran O'Huckathy, and he'll be introducing himself and going through his bit. And then afterwards we're going to get a couple of students, each ask him a question, and then after that you're going to be able to ask questions in the chat, either on Facebook or on YouTube, and we'll be able to bring them up. And we've also have questions from our class rep council and from our form that we sent out. So there should be a good show. And thank you for coming in. So I'm going to introduce you now to Kieran. So welcome, Kieran.
Thanks, Park. Thanks very much, and delighted to be joining you. And Garmagat, thank you for organising today's session. It was something we had planned to do throughout the semester, so really glad that it's working today. And I suppose a number of things. Generally, I walk the campus and meet students, and I always say when I meet students at induction that we'd like to know how you're getting on. So we bump into each other, and students would tell me how they're getting on and whether they're happy or sad or so on. That unfortunately we haven't been able to do this year, so we thought we'd take this opportunity just to be open in the context of a question and answer session like this. Secondly, to thank you for your fortitude this semester. It has been a very challenging semester, and we had an all-staff meeting yesterday where I remembered back to the time back in March when I stood in the drawing room in the quad and said that the campus, not the university, but the campus was closing. And we thought then it might be for 3 weeks or a month, or certainly to the end of the semester, where little did we think that was going to be for this long. So it's been a challenging time. We know that that the sense of belonging that you normally have to NUI Galway is more challenging this year. And I'd like to thank you, first of all, for your fortitude and your patience, and secondly, to the Students' Union and Pádraig and all his colleagues, Emma and Roisin and all the other officers and all the others working the Students' Union, for the work being done in supporting the student experience, because we know that while there's one piece which is online, there's another whole piece around the university life which is much different this year than other years. And I know that the Students' Union are particularly good, first of all, at raising issues in the context of the student experience, but also addressing those issues in very many cases with lots of activities. And we're very grateful to the Students' Union for that. And then finally, the purpose of today is not for me to warble on for long, but to be accessible to yourselves as our students, to answer any questions as best we can. If we can't answer if we don't have the answer today, we try and get it to you via Pádraig. And when I met the student council about a week and a half ago, I was keen at that stage to follow up with any questions, because I know there were lots of questions at that time, and I'm glad we've had the opportunity to do so. So, Stoppi Main Shin, agus Fogmain on Gert Mosmin, that's Steve Hain, agus Tommy de Sul Gemeg, Sport, agus Play Mahagoing, agus particularly thinking of our values. The first of which today particularly pertinent is openness. I think we're hoping that today will be an open discussion, but also respectful, also one that is excellent in how it addresses the issues that you raise. And then finally, our value, which when we launched the strategy last year was raised by you as a student body, was the value of sustainability. And particularly in the context of environmental sustainability, was where we think of that first. But I also think that this year has been particularly important in, first of all, sustaining the university experience, the student experience. Sustaining yourselves has been particularly challenging, and also our role as a university is to sustain the next generation. And again, I hope in the context of today that we have a discussion how we can address any issues you might have, and particularly as we plan for the second semester, how we might be able to support you to a greater extent than this semester, given all the restrictions because of COVID. So Stoppi Main Shin, agus Mayana Hossein Keshna, Gachlain Keshna, Martin Keshna, Gwif Kamimargov. Thank you.
Thank you, Kieran. Like we have had a hard year, and we found we've had to use online more and more. We found NUIG Confessions as a way, an outlet for a lot of students as well. So it's we've had an interesting year, to say the least. First of all, we're going to go through a couple of students' questions. So we've had the form out online since Monday, just to give students a chance to sign up. But at the same time, if you type into the comments at any point, those questions will be taken on too, and we'll try to hit every topic, because the important thing is, we get through a lot here. So first of all, I'm going to bring on Emma. So Emma is our education officer, and who's just going to ask you a question if she's ready by the studio.
Emma isn't in here yet, but we'll get her in a sec.
No problem. If that's the case, we might. I'll have to prepare the next question. Roisin actually is available, if that's okay. Otherwise, here's Emma. Excuse me.
Hi. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, lovely. So thanks so much, Kieran, for being involved today. We really appreciate you coming on to talk to the students and answer some of their queries. I know we've had a tough year, so like we've all said, it's great to have you here today. Just one of my questions. It's kind of a simple thing, but one students are really concerned about, and it's to do with water fountains. So I know we had to remove the water fountains for hygiene purposes, and that's been a great difficulty for students this year who are on campus. I'm just wondering, is there any possibility in the next semester to look into water fountains with foot pedals, or that are more COVID friendly, or just a way the students can get access to something really simple on campus where, like we said, sustainability is really important, so people don't have to keep buying plastic bottles, and just a way for them to refill their water on campus. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. And the issue with water fountains was twofold. First of all, the issue of sharing the same space, if you like, that we were asked to close the water fountains. And secondly, once they were closed, then water which stays or which isn't renewed regularly can be problematic for health purposes as well. So yes, we're thinking for the second semester at the latest, maybe even before then, the foot pedal water fountain will solve that first problem. And so we are looking at that in particular, and in particular, if there are ones that are more are busier than others, we'd be keen to know, because they're the ones obviously we should prioritise. And secondly, removes the second issue, which is the problem of stagnant water, if there is any. So yes, foot pedals for water fountains we are looking into, and we hope to have that in the second semester at the latest.
Thank you for that, Kieran. The next person we're going to have is Caitlin Hogan. Caitlin Hogan is a class rep, and she's going to just ask you a question as well.
Hi there, Kieran.
Caitlin, how are things?
Hi. I wanted to ask I have two questions. How are you supporting international students this year? And how is the university management team supporting student job opportunities with NUIG this year?
So yeah, international students. The Becky Way, the VP International, is leading out on that, and I think there are at least two parts of that. But first of all, back in March and April, we had quite a number of international students who stayed in Galway because they obviously couldn't travel at the time, and particularly grateful to colleagues and students for supporting a large number of international students in various ways, including in residence. So that was the first piece, if you like. And then secondly, we've put a lot of work into, again through the International Office, international students this year and this semester, supporting the broader student experience, if you like, in that regard. And very conscious that some students are on campus and in Galway, and some are not. So also thinking of, through Becky's support, how we might better support international students. Ideas in that regard were always very welcome, but we're particularly conscious of the challenges for international students, either who haven't been able to come to Galway, or if they have, of the challenges faced given the different experience than expected. Job opportunities, I'm not sure whether that's at NUI Galway you mean, or more generally. But again, through the Careers Office and Careers Development Office, a lot of work going into that. Again, thinking of international students in particular. The visa question and the stay-on visa is one we've been liaising with the Irish Universities Association on, and that's one we're keen to support, so that visas are still valid in the context of the current climate. but the Career Development Office in particular is the place to go in that context around supporting job opportunities in general and for international students in particular. I think Katie, I think you were mute in the first part. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay. I did mean with NUIG in particular. So like research roles or internships, placements or teaching assistantships.
Yeah, and they're always. I mean, we have opportunities that are generally available, advertised and otherwise. So they're open to students to apply. There are obviously particular criteria and eligibility in that regard. So I'm not sure in particular what the issue is around research roles have been particularly challenging this year because a lot of the research contracts ran out. So we did negotiate with the funding agencies for what are called cost extensions and then no cost extensions. So a lot of the research contracts which were running out during COVID were extended. But the job opportunities in general are open. HR would have open opportunities there. I'm not sure what else you mean in that context, or what would be helpful beyond that.
Opportunities, or for example, postgrads teaching for undergrad courses or helping lecturers grade assignments. I haven't personally really heard of too many of those opportunities, of which I thought there would be more, but perhaps with everything being online.
Yeah, there's still opportunity. I think it'd be worth maybe liaising with either through if supervisors or module coordinators, heads of school, because there are still opportunities, and we're keen to support, and we're thinking currently of how we support payment for graduate students to work there. So I wouldn't, maybe if you want to send a note on to me if there's any particular issue you might have in that regard, but I would certainly liaise back with module your discipline level, if you like, and see what opportunities there are, because it's not that there are different opportunities, I think, in the current context rather than less, because there's a lot. We've again tried to keep as much as possible opportunities for supporting the student experience, whether, as I say, it's in grading or in tutors or in other online work. So I would, again, we can follow up on that directly if you want, but otherwise I would also maybe liaise with somebody in the discipline to see what opportunities there are, the head of discipline or head of school.
Okay,
thank you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Caitlin. The next speaker we're going to be asking to come on to ask you a question will be Fionn. So Fionn Sexton is also a class rep, and he's in first year.
Hi, Fionn. How are things?
Hi there. So this question, you perhaps have heard it before, and you might not be able to give an exact answer just now, but it's slightly long-winded. So the government have responded to the massive shortfall in their funding by borrowing enormous amounts of money. This shortfall in funding was obviously due to COVID, and this massive borrowing was due to a massive spending program needed to keep the economy afloat and to keep a parity of services. So with lesser quality of education this year than any other year, less access to computer suites, less time in the library, no in-person lectures for many people, and some people who came to the university specifically because they thought they would be getting in-person lectures. Why is there a justification for imposing the same amount of money on students, if not more in some cases? Why impose a regime of university austerity when we can see over the last 12 years that austerity did not work in the finances of the country? Is there a more solid justification for this? Because we haven't really had full access to university accounts, as we've seen, rough breakups that we've been able to get in the Students' Union. So where is the justification for this? Why can you justify charging the same amount of money when the deficit this year is actually less than how much money was made last year? Is there an opportunity to borrow? That would be my question.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, and just on the transparency question, I mean, we've just come, myself and Mark have just come from the finance committee of the university, and there are presentations there on budget, so we would be keen to be as transparent as possible. Financial statements are available, though, online for going back to previous years, not yet this year because they're not yet audited. So And on that, then there are two parts. One is that if you look at just the recurring expenditure for last year, the recurring position for last year, it's slightly better than break even and slightly better than we expected. And for this year, and again, these are budgets, so it may change, but for this year, currently, we're budgeting certainly the last budget I saw, we were budgeting a loss which was going to use up effectively all the revenue reserves, all the available reserves of the university, and we made that a conscious decision because we would like to spend the university's resources this year because of obviously the challenges that we face. Now that may change, and the income position is slightly better than we expected, but that was the thinking at the time, is that we would spend the resources that we have. So that's the second piece. Thirdly, while the experience is different, the costs are primarily, the cost of the university are pay costs, and they haven't come down. And then there are other costs which have gone up, such as the cost of technology and other types of costs. So our costs haven't decreased. The qualification and the reputation of the qualification is the same. And I think we've spent a lot on the student experience, and we'd like to do more if we could. And as regards borrowing, and again, it's that would be a governing authority decision. I can't borrow on my own bat, and also the university would be very cautious about borrowing, because we've seen the difficulties other universities have gone into, particularly in the UK, when they do borrow. So very few Irish universities borrow. We borrow to build the student residences, but borrowing in itself is first of all has kind of regulatory constraints, if you like, around it being a governing authority, and then a broader HEA decision where necessary. But secondly, it's a particularly significant decision for us to take in that context. So we are spending our reserves this year and next year, or last year and this year, in order to support the experience. But our costs haven't gone down. If anything, they've gone up. And I think that's a particular challenge for us all, is how we manage in that context. So I don't know whether that answers, but again, we do have, and I'd be keen that the numbers are available, again, through student representation governing authority. As I say, we just come from the finance committee. So we're happy to talk those through and maybe make another presentation on that if that would be helpful.
Yeah, one thing I would just like to say, because this is not a question in which there can be a definitive answer given, I think you can tell that, but the cost of the university haven't gone down, like you've said. We know this, but the cost of students haven't either. In fact, they've gone up in many cases. I was booked to come to college with my accommodation paid for and hopefully 10 grand in my back pocket from working a job as a chef. I've essentially had to borrow the money to get my accommodation paid for, because I assumed that I'd be on campus, that I'd have my law lectures, that I'd have my economics lectures to a degree. And I found myself that there is not a level of education that's suitable for me. In the terms of the blackboard is incredibly difficult for people to use who have anxiety disorders. When your constant notifications are pinging, you don't have sometimes the mental capacity to deal with that. You'll distance yourself from the learning. And while significant steps have been taken, I think it should just be noted that students' costs haven't gone down, and that the imposition of online learning onto some people is not conducive to a good learning environment. And I would just hope the university acknowledges that, in the sense that we're paying the same amount of money. We are frustrated with the with a lot of the finances. We don't like the fact that a lot of the cost is being borne by us. So I suppose that's not so much of a question, more so than a follow-up. So thank you very much, Kieran, and I hope that was constructive.
Yeah, and thank you, Finn. I think that's a point well made, and we're very conscious of the challenges for students, and I should have probably mentioned that earlier, and I'm glad you raised it. I think it's a particular issue for us around, first of all, the financial challenges, and I have always been an advocate, and only recently at the education committee of the Oireachtas last week, I've advocated for students in need. If there was, and we did through the budget process this year with the Irish University Association. I was on a subcommittee which worked on it, and one of the main points I made at the time was that if there was support to be made, should be to students and to the student experience. And I think I'd advocate for that very strongly, in the context of exchequer support. I'd also advocate for student support more generally, as Pádraig hopefully will know, in the context of, we may sometimes disagree in how we do it, but certainly we're both on the same page as regards supporting students in need. And I think, again, your points are well made there, and we are very conscious of that. I think in the context of say things like accommodation and so on, again, we were very careful from the get-go, back in the spring and in the autumn, very conscious that students had made bookings and maybe had to reverse out of them. And in that case, in our own accommodation, we paid back the deposits with really no quibble. It was something that we made a decision around very quickly. Private accommodation, a different story, but again, myself and Pádraig have written to all the private accommodation providers in that regard also. So if there's more we can do there, please let me know. But we are and we consciously made the decision that we would spend all our available reserves in 2019, 2020 and 21 in order to support the student experience. And that's something we're very keen to progress with. And as a UMT, we're very keen to put in place. So, and for students who have challenges, please do get in touch with us, get in touch with those around you, either through the Student Union or student support. We are very keen to support students who need support, and even directly to my office if you wish, and I'll try and either, if I can't help myself, I'll find somebody who can. So please do reach out if you do need support.
Thank you, and thank you to all the speakers so far. Next, we're going to have Roisin, our welfare officer, to ask you a question. Thank you.
Hiya, how are you? Thanks for coming on, first of all. I thought it was interesting that you mentioned private accommodation there, because like obviously being the welfare officer, I've had a lot of queries about accommodation, and the main thing was that it was the university that told students to get private accommodation and told them that they would be online, where I know it was the government that came in and said everything would be online, but the responsibility is on the university there. But I have two questions anyway. The two questions is, one that I get often is, will parking spaces be shared between students and staff? And the second one is, can the university justify announcing semester 2 going online after the deadline to defer or drop out your course had already passed?
Yeah, thanks, Roisin. On the parking, yes, I mean, I think that's something we're looking at UMT. We've asked the building estates to look at how we might better manage parking, particularly in the current context. We are conscious parking spaces are few and far between, are a scarce resource. And secondly, looking to encourage people to use public transport, but particularly now with COVID, I think public transport is more limited and students more likely to be driving to and from campus. So yes, that's something we look at. And semester 2 questions, it was something that was raised the other day, and I think I was thinking about it after a month to come back on it. We were actually asked by government not to make any announcement. In fact, we were asked to delay the announcement we made, firstly, and secondly, so that we made it as soon as we could. And secondly, there was no consideration of whether this was I think the suggestion at the student council was that this in some way was a trap, if you like. There's no thinking of that at all. That wasn't the way we were thinking. If you put yourself in our shoes, first of all, we and going back to what we learned from the summer, we can't and couldn't be definitive too early on what the second semester would look like. And so we made the decision, and we considered it carefully. We made it as soon as we could. And we were asked in the context of government plans and where level 5 was going, and thinking more generally nationally about where semester 2 would look like. And we were asked to defer the decision, which we did for about a week or 10 days because of that. So we made it as soon as we could. We made we made available the best information we could, and that was the background to it. Thinking about. And not expecting any sympathy, but putting yourself in our shoes as a UMT, we're very conscious, first of all, that we need to make the right decision, make it carefully, and balance out the sense, first of all, that second semester for labs and technical and clinical work and a lot of the technical work will be the same as the first. So that's an important piece, but also looking to hear back from colleges and schools about their own plans for the second semester, and many want to do more. And if we can do more, we will, particularly in the student experience, student support, in-person support, maybe not large lectures, but something like it. So we are keen to that the first semester was challenging. The second semester will have the same level of campus activity plus more as and when we can, and particularly keen to support that. So that's the context in which the decision was made. The timing, that's the conscious that we were coming in and out of level 5 during that period, and how we might project into the second semester is still uncertain. Where we'd be in January, February, still uncertain. And it was in that context we made the decision, and there's no other consideration other than letting students know the best information we could as soon as we could.
Gurmila Mugget for that. Would you be willing to take a pay cut in solidarity with students and their families?
Yeah, another question was asked the other day. I don't. I'm very grateful for my own salary. I'm very conscious of the privilege that I have as a university president. My salary is set by government, not by me. I'm not sure it would serve any purpose. People would say that's potentially that's a bit of a gimmick. So that's my view on it. If I will government and that the salary is not set by me, and I'm very happy with whatever salary is set for this role.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Roisin. And so the next person who will be asking you a question, and thanks so far, Kieran, as well. So next up is Sean. So Sean Cameron is also from Class Reps.
Hi, can everyone hear and see me? Is it all working?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Thanks, Benny.
Hi, Kieran, and I'd just like to say I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to have this conversation with us. I think a lot of the stuff raised affect the entire university community here. And so I can fully appreciate the vast sums of money that are involved in running a third level institution like NUI Galway. And I myself and the students we're constantly requesting a reduction to the cost of fees. And I do understand that the money has to come from somewhere. Now, to my knowledge, we have the second highest fees regarding third level education in Europe, and we will have the highest when or if Brexit eventually happens. I think it's fair to say that this, for the most part, comes down to politics more than anything. Fees have increased due to underfunding to third level institutions. Funding to our universities was cut during the last recession, and it was never restored to what it was afterwards. The money from that shortfall has now become the burden of the student population. Now, I assume that the university has to remain an apolitical body. However, today I've come on to ask you if you yourself, and also on behalf of NUI Galway, would be willing to lobby current and future governments, regardless of party, for increased funding for the entire third level sector. So students are going to continue to bear the brunt of the cost until the government funding is increased or even matched with what it used to be in the past. And people are well aware of the student cries to reduce the cost of education, but this just seems to fall on deaf ears. But I truly believe that your influence and voice from your position as president of the university could be really helpful in supporting the struggles of your own students. Now, I understand that you've said this you've advocated for students in need, but I do think it should be all students, because having the highest cost compared to the rest of Europe it's a bit of a joke. I don't know, we're a good country, but it's fairly harsh. So I'm just here to ask if you're committed to lobbying the current government and future governments, regardless of their party, doesn't have to be a political thing, just any of them in power, to increase third level funding, and which this should in turn reduce the cost of third level fees to students. And if not, then what are you willing to do to help the reduction of all students' fees across Ireland? And cheers for hearing me out.
Great, thanks very much. Yep, I think very eloquent. You should be the advocate. I think. So first of all, yes, and I come back to the fees question in a second. But I've always said that there was a real revolution in education in the 60s, in the 1960s here. There was a Minister of Education called Don O'Malley who introduced free second level education. So up until then, you had to pay fees to go to second level, and he opened it up dramatically. He had other reforms as well, but this was the one that's remembered. And if we think about how revolutionary that was, what difference it made to society, what opportunities it gave to a generation that didn't have those opportunities, and then how that generation went on to create a new Ireland, both economically, socially, in many, many different ways, had a huge impact. And now I've consistently said, now is the time for that investment in third level. We can have that same revolution. and that the investment in education was what he called it. And very often, university presidents come on and think and talk about funding, and people are saying we're always looking for money, but it's not about the cost, it's about the value and the investment in education, the opportunity that provides, not just for this generation, but for future generations, not just for society now, but for society in the future. And I think your second piece, I think, is really interesting and a very good point, is that in the absence of that, what has happened is that students have made up the difference in two ways. One is through fees, and secondly through student experience, which is not as good as it could be if there was better investment in education, and better investment in the third level. And to come back to your question, therefore, yes, I've consistently said, and I co-wrote an article with one of Pádraig's predecessors, which was published in the Irish Times, that together with students, we are allies in this effort. We together should be making the case for further investment in education, and for me, that means that and I've said it, and one could take it two ways. But first of all, those who can't pay shouldn't be asked. Now, there are people who can, and maybe they should pay, but certainly the generality of my point would be that students who can't pay shouldn't be asked. And I think that's a really important principle. And I think your point is very well made, that fees therefore means that, or the lack of funding in third level means that students make up the difference to a great extent. Staff do too in the context of under-resourcing, but the impact is primarily on students. And I think that impact is ultimately therefore on society. And I'm particularly welcome the new minister and the new department, and the new minister's commitment to make that difference in the next year. So in 2021, he has said that he would hope that this is a problem that's been there a long time and needs to be fixed, and it'll be fixed in 2021. We'd support him in that. I look forward to working with the students' union and yourselves in that, because this is something that's really important for students, really important for obviously the third level sector in general, and really important for society, because we know the value that society places on that third level education, and having that available more widely, more accessibly, is really important and makes a difference in society. So going again back to the Education Committee in the Oireachtas last week, that's a point I made there, is that this is for the future of it's an investment for the future. And I'm with you on that, and I look forward to working with Pádraig. I know Pádraig has a view on this as well. I think there was a huge pity when there was a report called the Cassell's report on third level funding, and they had three options. And the one that was supported by universities at the time was the one which had student fees attached to it. I don't think that was the right option, either politically or equitably. And I would much favour the other option, which is that there should be state funding and state support, as there is in other European countries, as you pointed out. So I'm with you on that, and look forward to anything we can do to help. Very keen to support.
We are at a proper impasse where we need to support reducing fees by a lot. So hopefully the Cassell's report, which wasn't really acted on, actually gets looked into properly. Next we have Katie, who's going to be asking you a question. So thank you.
I think Katie is mute for the start, I think. I can't hear Katie. I don't know, can Katie be heard?
Yeah, no, sorry about that. We can't hear her at all. There's it looks like it's good, so there's a problem on her end.
Hello.
Oh, cool.
Great,
we can hear you now, Katie.
Okay. Can hear you now. Good, great.
Thank God. Okay. So I'm a first year class rep for English, and my question to you and the university is, what supports will be available for next year's second years, so this year's first years, in terms of adapting to in-person labs, tutorials and lectures when we're all eventually back on campus, as some first years this year may have never even set foot on the campus and will have gotten used to the online learning. As well as this, a lot of first years are at home for the rest of this school year, and will need the college's help when they have to leave home for the first time next year. And I think it's pretty important to begin thinking about this now, even though next year seems like a long way away now, because the first years that will be coming in will also need this support. So the college could run the risk of not having enough resources in their supports when it comes to time when people need to use them.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think something we, as you say, we need to think about. And I'm teaching a group this semester, a relatively small group of students. But what I've said, first years again, and what I've said is, thinking forward, hopefully there'll be a student experience or a university experience like more normally in second and third year. So I think one would hold out hope for that, and it's great to start thinking about it. Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, we probably need to therefore have a form of induction or something like that. I think it's an interesting idea to start thinking about, is what we need to do at the start of the 2021-22 academic year to support second years coming in. I think that's a point very well made. We probably need at module level to think about that as well, and think about how we might support that. And when you've raised it, I think you're right, raise it early. If there are other ideas that you might have, what else would you need? I was struck recently, we had a very good seminar with our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion group, and also their very good IUA seminar on inclusive learning. And the point made there very strongly was student engagement with and understanding what we need to do in order by engaging with our students. And this is, I think, an example of it. If there's that, to me, it should be a dialogue to say, well, it'd be very good to have a dialogue to say, what do second years need coming in next year? And can we plan ahead for that now? So if there are any particular ideas on that, induction is one. So what you normally have for first year, you might do again or differently, something maybe different for second year, how modules might be designed. The third piece is how we could continue to use online learning well. So I think we found, people talk about technology and how it might replace the classroom. And I think we found this year that it doesn't necessarily replace the classroom. And I don't think we plan to do that for the future. But there may be ways in which technology can be used better from what we've learned this year. And again, if there are any suggestions on that, how you might use it. So it's a really good question. I think I've started thinking about it and have some thoughts on it there. I don't know if there's anything else you might suggest. I think it'd be great to have ideas on how we can make second year more meaningful. And it's great to think ahead, thinking we're midway through first year, but we need to think over the horizon to second year. But I'll stop there, maybe think, have you any suggestions yourself?
I suppose it would just be important to hear from students themselves on what they think and what supports they need, rather than deciding what supports you think they need and just putting them out there. That would be the most important thing, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks very much. Thanks, Katie. And I think one of the things we've done this year is we've run some surveys for the student experience. And what we might do if we run one in the spring is think about maybe having a couple of open questions around what we would do for the second years, and even for third years coming back and so on. It's been a very a year of absence in many ways. And so if any ideas, send them directly to me or to Michelle Miller, Dean of Students, or through your college academic council. I think we might raise it even, and there's a meeting next week. So suggestions in that regard would be very helpful. And you're right, I'm an advocate of engaging with students. Very often best, certainly around process, what works best. So very pleased to have those suggestions if and when they come.
Thank you, Kieran, and thanks again, Katie. So next we're going to have Shane, who's a postgrad rep. So he's going to come on and ask you a question.
Hi, how's it going?
Hi, Shane, how are things?
Firstly, thanks to the SU for putting this on, and also thanks very much for your time. I'm just going to go straight to the point. Why are you still not paying postgraduates for their teaching contributions? And furthermore, why are you framing it as though those not being paid should be grateful? And because in the interest of time, I'll just add the rest of my question on now. Do you think it's unfair that the autonomy that you're pushing is putting schools at a local level under an immense amount of pressure to do the ethical thing? And in that sense, do you think the ethical thing is not being incentivized correctly?
That's a very good final question there. Yeah, just on the payment, we are and I'm keen and to progress this, and we have through the Graduate Studies Board this week progressed a change to the policy as regards payment for for teaching by unfunded postgraduate students in the first instance. So those on scholarships, sometimes there are constraints in the scholarship, sometimes not. So we need to explore that one in particular. But two things. So one, I'm very keen we progress that, because I think you're right. I think we should. It's not right that students who are unfunded. So if you're paying your own fees and then you're asked to do teaching, personally, I don't think that's right, and we should be changing that. And I'm keen that we do. And I know Donald Leach has been leading out on that. There's a working group working on it. Don't want to preempt their findings, but certainly keen that we come back on it quickly. And secondly, your question, I have an accounting background, and I'm very conscious of the impact as an accounting academic of numbers, if you like, on behaviour. So to go back to autonomy, and for those not familiar with it, effectively what we've done, tried to do, and certainly the purpose of it is that we give schools and colleges as much autonomy or as much freedom as possible in making decisions about how best to invest their own resources, how best to allocate their own resources, because those closest decisions are the best for making them. And so it used to be the case, or in some other places, it's the case that there's a process where you apply and for funding. Where in this case we've a model where the funding goes out to the colleges and schools, and we hope they make decisions closer to the student and to the where the decision has impact. So that's the intention of it. And you're right. Sometimes these kind of models then have what are called dysfunctional outcomes. That decisions are made which are for the wrong reasons, looking in the context of this autonomy, or this because of the numbers and the constraints of numbers. And that's something I think we should certainly. I would be keen that we avoid. If there's any examples of that, I'd be keen that we explore with colleagues how we can best ameliorate that. That's not the intention. And sometimes it does happen. I don't know if there are examples of it happening at NUI Galway. Well, then that shouldn't be the case, and I'd like to explore with colleagues how we can manage that. I don't know whether that answers the question. Certainly, it's not the intention. The intention is that the autonomy allows the local unit to make decisions as close as possible to where the decision has impact. And the literature, research would say that sometimes that means that you had dysfunctional outcomes, but that shouldn't be so. And either we should redefine the model, or we should address any outcomes and explore with colleagues how we might address those outcomes. Certainly not the intention that would be what's happening.
I respect the good intentions of that model, but just on that point of redefinition of the model, what's being created, I think, is a system where if schools want to do the ethical thing and pay their students for the work that they contribute, the essential work, that they have to bear the brunt of it themselves because the college is not funding it, which frankly is not. I don't think that's good enough for an institution in anywhere, really. I just think people should be paid for their work.
Sure, and so it's that particular example you're thinking of. Yeah, so I think in that case we need to, where there are cases of that and it needs to be addressed, we need to address it together rather than necessarily at the college level. And it needs then to be addressed by policy. So you set up a policy, and the policy sets out what's required. The policy currently is quite permissive, uses words like may and so on. I think we need to tighten up on those words, and then work with colleges and schools in order to implement it. And if there's issues financially, we'll then work through those as well. So yeah, if that's the example, I think again I'm with you on that. We need to work through it in detail, and I think part of it is that there are different applications across schools, which then makes it challenging for some schools over others and so on to adopt one policy. And again, we need to work through that to make it right. So would agree with you on that one.
Thank you for all that. So next we're going to have Kieran to ask you a question. So welcome in, Kieran.
Hey Kieran, how are you?
Yeah.
Thanks for your time.
No problem.
I'm a 1BC2 class rep, Commerce and French, and I just have a question relating to the possibility of language students coming on campus in next semester. I'm studying French myself, as I said, and I've discussed this with my peers in the class and with other students in German and Irish and the other languages, and we just feel that it's very challenging to learn the language online, and especially from the conversational classes point of view. There has been a lot of discussion as to are these effective and are the desired learning outcomes being reached. I was glad as a first year student. I think the university has been very good with communication regarding the second semester, and you sent out 2 very clear emails which stated, I think, we will facilitate and support staff and students in providing additional in-person on-campus activities as appropriate. So I'm just wondering if and how this statement will be applied to language students in the next semester. Obviously, public health measures are critical, but if, like today, we were in level 3 come February, what would your thoughts be?
Yes, c'est une bonne question. Thank you. Merci. I suppose that, so in principle, yes, so lab-based, the guidelines, and very, very clear, they say lab-based and practical tuition. And so lab-based could potentially include language labs. The challenge we have, I suppose, is twofold. One is social distancing in that context means it creates particular challenges around timing and resources and the capacity in the labs themselves, and how we might manage that, first of all. And then secondly, our colleagues in languages and how they might wish to articulate that. So we've taken the view that it's really, we'd like to support colleagues in doing as much as they can in the context of language tuition. I think is a particular good example of that. There are, again, and I mentioned earlier around the timing of the announcement, part of that was sounding out colleges and schools about what the thinking was for semester 2, and there is enthusiasm, I think, for doing more, including in languages. So I know it's not a direct answer about what might be possible or what might be there, but certainly thinking that we'd like to think about how we would accommodate language learning and language labs in person to a greater extent. The risk is the congregation risk, the social distancing, and then to what extent that can be supported in the context of the resources we have, and colleagues already really stretched, and students as well. So an answer, we're hoping to do more. Can't commit, obviously, in the context of, now we're in December, what will February look like? But thinking that in the second semester there would be more, and maybe again liaising through your discipline in order to see how that might be accommodated. But certainly as a UMT, we'd be looking to support it if we can. So I don't know whether that answers the question, but certainly is the intention if we can.
Thank you. So next we're going to have Seb on. So Seb is our postgrad research officer with the Students' Union. So thank you for joining us, Seb.
Thanks.
Thanks, Barry, for introducing me there. I just kind of want to ask a question that kind of like builds on what Shane was asking about before, about the postgrads getting paid for their teaching. Seeing as you just mentioned that self-funded PhD students will now be getting paid, I just kind of want to focus more on the PhD students who are on scholarships and are still expected to be teaching without pay, because the university requires scholarship students to sign a form for revenue saying that the scholarship is entirely for educational purposes and that there should be no like quid pro quo like required. And I know that the university generally takes a line that teaching, like learning to teach, is part of our education. But if that's the case, then why also doesn't the university actually provide us with training to teach rather than just throwing us in the deep end, which kind of makes it seem like it is exploitation? And kind of as a second question, like if you still have time after that, the university is signed on to the European Union or the EU Researchers Charter, which states that teaching work done by postgrads needs to be paid. Can you just kind of like speak to that? Why the university signed on to that, but isn't actually following that line?
Sure. Yep. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So the question of the funded students is I suppose twofold. First of all, sometimes we fund those research scholarships internally, and how how that might be resourced in the context of the support they give to teaching, and sometimes it's not. I wouldn't necessarily say it's teaching, but also support to teaching, and is sometimes what constitutes the financing for it, if you like, or what supports the financing for it. So if we were to change the model, we need to change. Maybe that the scholarship structure would need to change as well. And that's something I think needs to be considered and is currently being considered. It's a thornier issue than the non-funded students, and therefore I know that Donal, as I say, Donal Leach, the Dean of Graduate Studies, is leading out on a working group to look at it in more detail. Having set that group up, I don't want to preempt what they might come out with, but certainly again the principle for me would be an important one, that we have equity for students. If there are conditions of a funding grant, well, those conditions need to be respected. If there are conditions for revenue and tax compliance, again, clearly they need to be respected. So I've been, and I know Donal is, and the members of the committee, I'm keen that we push ahead on coming to a conclusion on that, and to come back to it. And I've asked Donal to progress it as quickly as we can, because it is it's somewhat more difficult issue. And having signed up, as you say, to the charter, I think we need to live up to our commitments in that context. So that's why we parked that piece. And to be honest with you, that's why it's knottier, or it's more difficult or more challenging for us to solve than for non-funded students. But it's something we want to solve, and certainly within this academic year, if not earlier, I'd like it to be solved, and I've said so. So I don't know whether that answers your question, but it's honestly where we're at.
Yeah, no, definitely that answers the question. And like I'm on that working group.
Great, good. Yeah. I'm keen to progress it as much as we can. Yeah, thanks, Seb. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So next we're going to have William McCabe asking you a question. So thanks everyone. Thanks for all the speakers so far.
Hello. Thank you for your time. So at the last council meeting when you appeared, I asked you about the fees and how much of the fee is being paid by students and what's being done by the university to justify the fee. And you mentioned that a lot of focus on second semester will be put into mental health services, and you're going to try to bring up more of the services. But there's also extra government funding in those areas. So what is being paid for by the students if there is extra government funding in the areas you plan to expand? And furthermore, even still, there's only half the services being provided, or 3/4. It doesn't matter. It's not the full services, half the services, but the students are expected to pay the full fees. And you make it clear that the university is planning is going to lose money this year. It has less income this year, but so does the students. The students have lost a lot of money this year. So, and I think a university, a government-funded institution, is far more in a position to take a financial hit for a year than individual students and families. So how does the university justify keeping the student contribution as it is, despite half the fee, despite half the services?
Sure, and again, come back to the previous question. I mean, I think in fairness, we are, and again, the budget as the last version we had doesn't tend to spend the reserves of the university. So I think we're very keen to support student well-being. I know our colleagues in student services, along with the Students' Union, are really putting a huge effort into supporting the student experience, and did in the spring, have again in the autumn. While some of that is paid for by government, for sure, and there's some additional funding in that regard, there is still funding, additional investment that needs to be put in, not only in the health service and supporting students who are in difficulty, but also and again, I'd encourage anybody with challenges to come to us, because we would like to help. But secondly, a lot of work going into supporting students more generally, in order so that issues won't arise. So that a lot of really good work, I think, by by student services, by the Students' Union. And again, have invested heavily in that, invested heavily in the technology around the teaching. So I can really appreciate the challenges. A lot of the funding from government went to student support, which is exactly right. And if there are ways in which we can do more, please do let us know, because we'd be keen to. But right now, we don't have the, and I mentioned at the Student Council the other day, we can't spend more than we have. And that's the where we are certainly planning for this year, is that's where we're at. We're spending the available reserves and recognizing the real challenges that are there for students at the same time.
But surely investments in technology should have been a more long-term in the past. This is more modernizing the university's systems as opposed to catching up with a lot of the new challenges. If anything, these new challenges are just forcing the university to do what it should have years ago.
Possibly, and it's a function of having been underfunded. I mean, I think part of, and I think some of the previous questions reflected this. The university sector in general has been underfunded, and students have been making up the difference, and staff, and the experience has been affected by it. So it's partly that, but partly also, if you think about it, there are things like licenses for Blackboard, for Zoom, for a lot of different technologies and platforms which you wouldn't normally have had to pay. And we do this year, and there's also a lot of work gone into. We've about 1,000 students on campus still. So I think the point was made in one of the comments earlier in the chat, that there are still significant numbers of students on campus, and we've again had to invest significantly in making the environment safe for those students and supporting our colleagues in making it so. So there's a lot of, and some of that came from government. There's some funding for PPE and a lot of the other supports there. But at the same time, there's been significant underinvestment in third level in general, and no more than the health service. I think we're finding this year that once it comes under pressure, things begin to squeak. And I think we're particularly keen and particularly conscious, particularly keen to address, and particularly conscious to be mindful of the impact on students, and trying to do as much as we can in order to accommodate that and to facilitate that. And again, I'd say, very conscious if there are students with challenges, and we've all had challenges, and that's this year. So I think it's an environment that has been very challenging for everybody. And if there's students with challenges, please do let us know. We would like to help if we can.
Thank you. And next, we're going to be moving on to an Irish question from our Irish officer, Aaron, as well. So thank you, Aaron.
Hi, Cichalto. Tá ga ceist ort. So okay count cá hat I gapan tú go féidir leis an old school rucht na Greg ausú go háirid tar éis dóú I thuris puncaí go muid an account in a tain old school na tá ag sáú ach na tanga ifigúla madla cáirthaí dá hangachta céhfuil muidna an tain old school dá hangach sa tír. And just for people who didn't understand any of that, it's just a question regarding the access to the Irish language in the university, especially considering it's come to light recently that we in NUIG, the only bilingual university in the state, is breaching our obligations under the Irish language legislation with regard to bilingual signage.
Yep, an ága there, and agus sagan go tú chun cín mad leis an Gaeilge is min a bhuictí tá sin. So just gá cuid an ceisian so can cé ceann ná conas mar tamid chun carú le ruach na Gaeilge agus tá sé ráte go hana an stéir mé rísé. Ní dólam sa gohfuil an plán stratéisic an plán teanga tá going fá láthair úlhína go leor. Ba cuardúing bheith níos úlhíní tá níos mó servicí ar fáil around an scoil na eile maidir leis an Gaeilge. Céim cóna mar hampla na mar tá seo. So mar sóda déireann tá coiste buna going le stratéis maidir leis an Gaeilge a cothú tá túfás ar siúil freisin maidir leis an Gaeilge, so ní féidir sin darmadaí anmhar sin nó sin a cailún sa chórá. Tá nachad a déanamh obair iontacht sa Gaeltacht tá an scoil na Gaeilge déanamh obair iontacht maidir leis an léin Gaeilge táid anna láidir sa léin Celtic agus sa léin Éireannach go generalta. So tá reinintmhaid ar siúla ná ceapan hain gur ceartún bheith agus ríisicht an beag an stratéis mar chuide sin gur ceartún bheith níos úlhíní ceartún bheith níos peblií féin an úlhín atá agin maidir leis an Ghaeilge. Agus mai hain agus an róla tá gomsa tá mé soléir agus bheas na hoscoil na eile nó Uachtaránaí na hoscoil na eile tá mé soléir go bhfuil róla na hoscoil na maidir leis an Ghaeilge agus róla ag galibh go háire tuiscibhar hain ghfuil míid ní amháin ar bhróg na Gaeltachta ach tá míid sa Gaeltacht. So tá méid ar gahrú, tá méid carna, tá méid ar anhuidóir. So tá anad Gaeltacht going hana hain nach bhfuil a géine eile agus is maithan rud é sin is luach mór é sin doing. So tá mé tríd an stratéis agus tá tú buinte leis airnings tá mé tá tú déanamh obair an bhahan, tá mé súil go méid níos má dhéanamh going agus ní mí dúil hína go leor agus mar Uachtarán tá mé chun chun sinna chuin ala dul mas mí leat agus bheith chun cían sin. Maidir leis an dúlgus maidir leis an Ghaeilge agus na cóthaí, so as regards the signage, an príomhrad a bhíonn sin agus a rís tá tuairmach ma héanaar sin agus talach mar a géachta go bhfuil beidir tuair mealacha ná tháinig séach sa tuaireach sin an cóthanú an branda tá going mar ollscoil tá NUI Galway ar bar agus ollscoil a hairnú óí fad a Gaillimh ar an bun. Agus sin an lucht a smó bhí ag an nar tháinig an Commissioner Changa ar a campus. Sin an lucht a smó bhí agus ein tíim lo tá iartha gom ar gólachas is rain mar a géachta go nach rófií é sin. Cosúil go mé cuatha bóthrán, ní éon nualadh é ollscoil ar an Gaillimh a chur a bar agus an sin NUI Galway ar an bun. Sin is ceart bheith ann. Ach tá tuairimán maidir le brandál agus le conas mar híon branda agus ghfuil brandaí agus ghfuil siad eisceachtúil mé héin go persint in the 18 sin ach agus tá iartha gom mar ar gálacha sa raid mar a géachta sin ahrú. So go mbeidh na cóthaí omláin a clí agus dílis den acht. So just on the tá mé míis as Gaeilge seachas as bearlach on the signage in the universities where particularly we were found at fault, and as I understood it in the report, it was more around where the order in which Irish and English were in those in the brand of the university. So when you go around, you might see a bit like the Students' Union logo at the bottom of this, that the English is on top and the Irish is on the bottom. And that shouldn't be how it should be. It should be the other way around, like a road sign. And I agree with that. There are people in marketing who think, well, that this is a brand and therefore it's exempt. But I think it makes it clear, OE Gaillimh on top and NUI Galway on bottom. I think to me is a better way to go. And yes, and I shouldn't have guessed got there and I got higher.
Agus eile ort just sort of agatu. Dúirtú an sin cúpla námaid a hin faoi tacht na hinna stíochta de thug mé faoi dhearra an láhan an nachhfuil mór an óna díochta ar son na Gaeilge ar an UMT. Sílim féin gur baisio a tháinig an mea olbór ar an Gaeilge an ollscoil agus chunig muid é seo leis an mea a tháinig ar an irid ábhaid atá le fáil trí Gaeilge agus le dúnú cafe le Gaeilge. An bhfuil ein planana at óna díocht ar son na Gaeilge a bhéadú ar an UMT ónas go mbeadh brachtain níos fearr ag an Gaeilge ar bhanistíocht na hollscoile go háirid i ggóthaics na hinne stíocht de capital de a bheith ag tarlú amachchan seo. Agus just reached just na Béileoirí. You said there a few minutes ago about the importance of investment. I realised there today that there isn't very much representation for the Irish language and the university management team. I personally think that this is where the lack of choice for Irish language subjects has come from, and we've seen this with the Clouds and the Cafe and the Gaeilge as well. Do you have any plans to increase the representation of the Irish language on the university management team, so the Irish language will have more access to university management, especially in light of the capital investment that will be happening in the future?
Yep, Keshma. So, and yeah, ní don't, yeah, tá Gaeilge gom sa mar Uachtarán agus tógú le Gaeilge mé, who's ar gachán nua, agus it's a táile Gaeilge mé, so tá mise Tá Gaeilge gomsa agus sin Gaeilge mai fiche cuile lá so agus am héil sa hain so ní liscom cad ar an UMT an coiste banistíochta an bhar an banistíochta ní tá an onadíocht ó na choláistí agus an sin ó na héine agsúla le héidí an cisteúr agus lucht acuní déine agus so tá níl siad a freistal ar an Gaeilge a háireach ar an aine den bhfuil siad a ganas. Agus an sin tá Gaeilge póla dochirtí agus a rís tá Gaeilge lífa ag siúd agus tá dúlgus ar siúd maidir leis an Gaeilge so tá an Gaeilge site ins na hifiigi is sínseirí san ollscoil agus an rud go bhfuil lomsa agus a rís tucht ar eispéidir ag an ceist faoi sír sem maidir le stratéis. Tá mis trééis agus seáis is tá mé cuire amach an seo mas mí nó beidir níos mna cuire ach ó tháinig mis an seo ag an ollscoil tá mé trééis fearrá bhfuil stratéis sem maidir sin Gaeilge anna hácht doing agus go mé anna go mé géirí chuc an cín agus go mé ansimime gom ó héh cuasaí ealaine de chuh stratéise de taú leis. Jaim multi ó ran agus an ollscoil agus tá mé súla cean áil maidir leis an Gaeilge freisin. Tugan daoine gom gomininic agus déironn si tá méid lurge seo dhéanamh agus tá méid lurg dulcan cín maidir lei seo. Ba bhrealam de me rud é gan na tuchttas an stratéise tá going fol áthgus na costí tá going ar an stratéise agus beag sé tucht éis gomsa mar caihirirla ar an coiste stratéisiach. Ach ba bhrealam dá me stratéis úlhínic a tuchtá sin. Mar gomininic ní cuaga dó bheitthe brethir ar an Uachtarán, mar tá mis treéis fécú blin in na hoscoil an éise agus ad a gcóí tá rudí bhd níos fearrma tá si lona leis a bobbal agus lona leis an áitiú ina darlín rudí agus tarlín rudí gomininic sa fphobal seachas sa quad nu in na méfiicse. So de bevrálam á tuchttas an stratéis nua dá méid rud ag an úd bhína gána ar Ciarán, Pól, UMT, tá méid lurg seo dhéanamh seo thucias agus tá méid lurg bhórdaíocht. Agus sin tá mé súil tuchttas sin. So to come back to just briefly on Aaron's question, just I'm come from an Irish speaking language. Irish is my first language. I didn't learn English till I was going to school around the age of 5. Irish is very, very close to my experience and my lived experience on a daily basis. If I speak to my family, my siblings, I speak in Irish. They would think it's strange if I didn't. So Irish is represented at the top level in the university. The most senior officer is Paula Doherty. Similarly, there are many others on UMT who either have Irish or are very supportive of Irish, and they represent their own units, so finance, HR, and so on. And what I said then at the end was I'm very keen, and I've said from the beginning when I came here, that I'd like a really ambitious strategy for Irish and for our position in the world and our location. And what makes it particularly distinctive is the Irish language, and our location here makes us, nobody else can have what we have here as regards Irish. And that's a really good thing. And coming out of we have a strategy committee, which I chair, and that's symbolic that I chair it. Aaron is one of the, is chairing the student experience subcommittee. I would be very keen that out of that comes an ambitious strategy for Irish, that we say, here's our vision, here's what we'd like, where we'd like to be in 5 years' time. And UMT, please support us on that. Uachtarán, na Hallscoil, please support that. I'd be very keen on that, because I think it's better coming from the university community rather than from my head, because it's more effective coming from the university community. So sin an freigra mas agus sin an sais a current cuir amach an sin mas mean that there. And so
Thank you, and I think it was vitally important, like the same way, like as any student should have the right to speak Irish anywhere on campus, that to be able to ask you a question in Irish too. So our last question from a student like on this is going to be Michael, sorry, and then we're actually just going to be going to questions on the chat. So if you want to put some questions into the chat, we will be going on to them.
Grant.
Hi, Kieran. I just have 2 questions to ask. The first one is, there's been a lot of talk about mental health facilities in the college, and I'm just wondering, ahead of semester 2, does the college plan to outline where the improvements could be made via added investments, extra resources, extra staff? Like, the mental health of students has been a problem before COVID. Unfortunately, it's another issue that this pandemic has highlighted further. I'm just wondering, how does the college plan to help students that are in unnecessary times. From what I've heard, I don't know if it's 100% accurate, that there seems to be like a bigger backlog of student appointments when it comes to student counselling. I'm just wondering how that plans to be sorted. The second thing is, just from talking to lecturers, I'm a class rep in final year, and just from talking to them, it's really good that they're taking like anything on board we're saying as to how things could be improved or what we're finding difficult, and it seems to be a real desire and willingness on their behalf as well to make improvements for the second semester. So I'm just wondering, but they do add resources. So I'm just wondering if there will resources be given to lecturers to improve courses for a second semester and improve online learning.
Yep. Okay. Great. Thanks very much. Yeah. So I think coming out of today, and Michelle Miller, I think, is on the call as well as Dean of Students. I think it's very clear that if there's a message around what's required, and other questions as well, but is support around mental health and student experience, and on the back of that, I think we'll certainly, and maybe even for next week's UMT, prioritise that as an issue. What are we going to do with our whatever resources we have in order to invest in that particular area? Because very often you need to plan ahead. One of the things which I think caught us is the speed of and the length of the COVID crisis. And I think if we plan ahead for next semester, we should start that now. So that's one thing I've taken from today. And we will be looking at that in more detail and be asking maybe the mental health service and the health service in general if there's anything else we can do. And I think there's two parts. One is obviously supporting students who are finding things difficult, and then supporting, making life easier so that students find things less difficult. And I think both of those need support. And I think coming from today, we knew this already and we're planning for it, but I think we'd make that more of a priority. I know that doesn't necessarily answer the question directly, but what it might look like, but I think that's a very clear message. And then secondly, the staff support. Yeah, so I think one of the reasons why we wanted to plan early for semester 2 was, there were many reasons, but one was to try and find out what the challenges were for staff and to try and support staff as much as possible. Now, one of the things which was challenging for us is that the funding for under the COVID crisis, unlike first and second level, in third level, none of that funding went towards additional resources on the staffing side in teaching or in research, or teaching in particular. So that's we needed to manage within our own resources. And again, the reason why we're planning ahead, and be asking the college deans, what is it can we do more around support, whether it's in technology or in people, for planning for the second semester, particularly given that, going back to things like language labs and so on, there may be more need around that. So that, and even think of the language labs, finding language instructors is quite challenging, because second level also took up some of the available talent there. So keen to plan around. I know that doesn't answer the question directly, but it's two things I think we've learned for semester 2 is we need to plan ahead quickly and early, and secondly, those are particular priorities we need to look at. So I don't know whether that answers the question, but certainly it's one that we'd intend to look at in greater detail.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who's come on to ask a question. So now we have
two things before people go, or people, not the people going right now, but just say two things. One, first of all, really appreciate the time, and I know there's questions coming up, but I think part of, we talked at the beginning about university's values, and I'm struck and I'm actually moved by, first of all, the sense of openness that's here. So that questions, but secondly, the sense of respect. We know that we may not always see eye to eye, but I think the sense that people are the way in which questions are being asked, I think I'm really taken back by. So I really appreciate that. And secondly, just thinking about the question that and the point that Erin made and that Pádraig made after that, this sense of being yourself. One of the things that I say at induction every year and at graduation when I can is that it's really important that as students you get the chance in university. Sometimes it's a chance to reinvent yourself. If you're been a long time in one place, sometimes you're seen as something that you're not. And I think if there's one thing NUI Galway I hope can offer, is the sense of students being themselves. So whether it's Oscuelige, whether it's in your interest in life, whatever it may be, I hope that that's something you can find, if not this year, in your experience at NUI Galway. Just in the context of that being mentioned, I think you're your best self when you're yourself. And if you try to be somebody else, you'll always be second best. And just in the gap between questions and those in the chat, I just wanted to mention that because I think just both Aaron and Pádraig's comments reminded me of it. So thank you for, as I say, the quality of questions and the respect, the value of respect that you're upholding, but also really important, this sense of ourselves that we need to maintain. So I just want to say that in passing. So, but we'll continue on. Thanks, Pádraig. Thanks.
Thank you, Kieran. And I do think this was a vitally important thing, just so students can get, they can talk to you and actually know that you're an open, you can be someone who is emailed as much as I am as well, because, students should be allowed to ask questions at any point. So the first question that I got in from the chat is, why do lecturers not have set office hours this semester? What is the accountability on lecturers if they are not responsive or available virtually?
Okay, so the first one, just on office hours, two parts to that. One is that the advice and the clear instruction, and even as the crisis evolved, it was getting clearer, was that if you could work from home, you should. And secondly, particularly around level 5, there was a particular concern around congregating and social and other contacts. So that's why the first semester ended up as it was. But in the second semester, again, we'd hope to be able to accommodate colleagues more in access to offices and having office hours, again, challenging sometimes because the COVID is particularly dangerous virus. It's very heavy, very quick transmission. So we need to avoid social contact, and that includes in the university at work as much as possible. So that's the context for it. But again, we'd hope to have more availability in second semester, and certainly as COVID becomes hopefully more manageable as we progress through 2021. The question on availability online, in that case, I would contact. So obviously the staff member is hopefully doing their best as regards availability, and I would also then maybe touch base with their head of discipline, head of school, or the college office if they're not available. There may be reasons why they aren't. There may be somebody else who's available in their stead. So finding that out, I think would be the next step, if you like. So I don't know whether that helps, but again, or maybe coming back through me, and I could. It's in a helpful way to everybody, in a constructive way, maybe help out. But that's the best process if colleagues aren't available online, to contact either the college office or the school office and/or their head of school in a helpful way. As I say, sometimes there are reasons why people aren't available, and it may be more an inquiry more than anything else. I'd encourage you to take it in that light.
Thank you. The next one that we got in was how, this is another one on lecturers too, it's how is it acceptable for lecturers to set required reading of books that are only available in the library or else cost a couple of €100 per book to buy? Not everyone has access to the physical library, especially this year.
Yeah, that's a particular question. And I think, I certainly from my point of view, I'd encourage lecturers to assign material that's either easy accessible or second-hand is the other one. One of the reasons why you might assign the same text as previous years is to make it more accessible to students. I mean, the other piece is that lecturers, faculty have latitude within their own module and discipline to decide what's best and what material is best. But again, I would try and maybe address it through the lecture and try and engage with how the resources might be available in other ways, and/or for example, again, I'm teaching first year module as it happens. It's another colleague has done it, but what we've done is we did a customized text for the class, so it makes it smaller and therefore easier. And there's also an electronic version available. So I try and liaise with the lecturer in the first instance, maybe explain the issue. And lecturers in general will certainly try their best, first of all, to allocate and assign the best material for the class to help you as a student body, and secondly would hopefully help out in with regard to any challenges there might be with regard to it. I don't know, again, it's a specific question, but certainly that would be my view. One of the reasons I'm teaching, limited enough teaching, but teaching nonetheless, is to, first of all, because I enjoy it, as I have this semester, but secondly, to also give example about what I would do, and that's what I'm doing, is assigning a text that's either both available in the library and or electronically, and a customized version, which therefore makes it more accessible. An important issue for sure.
Thank you, Kieran. So now we're actually going to switch it up a little bit. With me and Emma are just going to ask you questions, so it's not just me. So Emma has 2.
Yeah, so the first question I have is, why does the library study space booking system open at midnight instead of 8 a.m. Or half the seats opening at midnight and the other half opening at why don't they half them open at midnight and half them open at 8 a.m. And because that caters for a specific group of people. And the other question is, why is the library the only study space available at the weekend? So there's 2 of the questions from the chat.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so we're keen to maybe explore and I know this came up at the student council the other day as well, and I've asked about it on that basis, is the booking system for the library and how we might improve it. And maybe we liaise with yourself, Emma, and Pádraig and Roisin, to see how that might be done better. I know the library is really working hard on, and colleagues there were one of the first to open, and I think very keen to. One of the things I find with the NUI Galway Library is, and I've said this to colleagues there, is it very keen as a resource to share information rather than keep it, and I think that's been their attitude. I think it's during COVID, challenges around the booking system for sure. One thing we'd say, and we found when I asked the question, one thing came back was that sometimes spaces are booked and then not used. So we're particularly not necessarily in the library, but also in the Bailey Allen and more generally. So trying to find a way, obviously, we need to think about how we might do it better, help students better. And I know a question was asked around the timing and whether we could send reminders about bookings and so on. So we could probably change that. But also, if you book a space, encourage you to either, if you can't take it, to unbook it because it makes it available to somebody else. And the staggering in time-wise of booking times is probably a good idea. So yeah, we might come back, Emma, and maybe we might talk offline about that one, because I think it's one that we found to be a challenge. And then the out of hours space, so both after 10 o'clock, let's say, and weekends. Again, the challenge there is, in the context of COVID, is the supervision of the space in order to make sure that there aren't too many people in it, that people are keeping their social distance. And again, we can either do that through security, let's say, or we can have, I know we're working with yourselves on things like student ambassadors. So again, let's maybe have that discussion, because so the reason is why that's a challenge, or why the time generally is a challenge, is because with the health guidelines as they stand, we need to make sure that the space is properly is safe for students. And in order to do that, we probably need to have some level of supervision. People there's a certain number of students can come in and know more than that when they're in, how the space is used, and all of that needs additional support outside of what we would normally have absent COVID. And that's the challenge for us out of hours and weekends, is trying to manage that given the resources we have. But again, keen that we would if we can.
Yeah, I think definitely having supervision is really important this year, but I think it's definitely something we can have a conversation about just as we come up to exam time, the most stressful time of the year for students. The other question that we had was, considering the college has told the students that if they wish to continue the semester 2 fully online, they can do so. So should those who are supposed to be going on work placement be offered the choice to opt out also?
Yeah, good question. I'll just clarify the first part. So what we've said, and in our communication, we use the word additional around semester 2. So if you're currently in a lab-based and clinical subject, so and currently on campus, it's likely that you will be needed on campus. In fact, you will be. Your courses will continue to be on campus in semester 2, and you'll still have to attend for semester 2. And we're trying to, and I know the colleges have tried as much as possible, and for students who can't attend for good reason, to facilitate that, to have a process where they can apply for exemption and so on. But for the most part, if you can attend, and if there's no reason why you can't attend online in the second semester, sorry, on campus in person in the second semester, if you're having the first, the same level of courses will continue on campus in the second semester as in the first. So if you're on campus in the first semester for labs, clinical work, and so on, you're likely to be for the second. And so, or you will be for the second. So to bear that in mind. Secondly, then we did say, and we're conscious of that you know, we're for those elements then that will be in person, which don't need to be on campus. So, for example, the large lectures that are currently online, we try to continue those online. So we're very conscious of the rights of students. Or, you know, if you've issues coming on campus and you don't need to, well, then you have the same rights, if you like, as students who can come on campus. So I think we're trying to manage that as well around that level of optionality. Placements is a particular specific question, likely to be, I think the issue with placements very often is that they're part of a program or part of a requirement for a program, you know, in areas like medicine, other disciplines and so on. So if they're part of a program and required as part of that program, it's very difficult therefore to make them optional. And I don't know whether they're the ones particularly you're thinking of, but if there's a requirement in a program to be on a placement in order to have the practical experience of that program, and there are many examples of that, well then, a bit like the previous one, if it can't be done other than by way of a placement, well then it's very difficult to make the placement optional. And so I'd suggest maybe liaising again with the college or school to explore that. But there will be cases where placements are necessary, and therefore they're necessary, and we can't kind of resile from that. And liaising with the college or school and understanding either, you know, to what extent they are, and then secondly, if there's something else can be done to facilitate it, either timing wise or otherwise. But you know, I think in very principle, if you think about from the beginning, the public health advice was that if something could not be done in person, then it should have been done online. But the flip side of that is if it couldn't be done other than in person, well then it had to continue in person. So things like the lab-based work, the clinical work, there was no other option. You couldn't do those online, so therefore they were on campus. And the places, the things which went online were those which could be done online. But if they couldn't be done online, well then they'd continue on campus. I know that this is sounding more complicated as I say it, but there's that level of necessity. If something is necessary to be done in person, well then the guidelines said that it should be. In fact, it was given all the infrastructure, the safety architecture around it in the context of COVID, that it should continue on campus, which is why the lab-based and clinical work, why the library, why the research continued on campus to the extent that it did. I don't know if that answers the question, Emma, but that's the around the placements. That's the thinking.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran.
Thank you. So I've got now a couple for you. The first one in is where is the line drawn when the lecturer is putting up poor material really close to assignment deadlines due to quote unquote poor Wi-Fi? Yet, if we were to do the same, there would be no leniency given.
All right, good question. Yeah, again, I'll give a personal view on this. We should be held to the same standards as our students. I've always said, you know, for us, one of the things we teach is professionalism, and a part of that is if you make a promise, you keep a promise, and you know, you hold yourself to the same standards. Then, because I don't know the particular instance or instances, again, there may be reasons, good reasons or not. I would liaise again, engage with I know this is challenging, but engage with the lecturer, maybe through the class rep, but certainly I can give a personal view, and hopefully my class would experience me in that context is you know, you hold yourself to high standards. For example, for a class test this year, I didn't examine material which we covered that week. We finished, say the exam class test was in week 7. We covered material up to week 5, week 6 at a stretch. So I would think there are good practices that lecturers should follow. I can't be in every classroom. There may be reasons why there are particular challenges in the overall environment. I would try and understand it by engaging with the lecturer. Because the other thing to remember is, lecturers are there and come in and they're in this job to do their best, and that's what they're doing. And very often that's by engaging with them and trying to understand the challenges that are there for you and for them, I think is the best way to start. And sometimes that's difficult to do at a personal level. A class rep has that role. So I would, as much as possible, engage with the lecturer in the first instance and try to get that dialogue going. Because my experience, again, over 20, 25 years, and certainly in Galway, is that lecturers will try and engage, will have the student interest at heart. And by having that dialogue, hopefully that would then have that understanding around that.
Thank you, Kieran. So I have two on accommodation that I'm just going to bring at the same time. So the first one is, will you lower the cost of staying in Goldcrest for a single night? It's currently €50 a night, and students are finding that ridiculous. And the second one is the university planning on putting any additional pressure on private accommodation to get students refunds, such as removing them from advertising on your website?
Oh, good question. That second one was a good question. Yeah, we could consider that. And I know Pádraig, as you know, we've written to the private providers, and I was talking to Pádraig last week about who hasn't, or this week about who hasn't provided refunds. And I think I'd be keen that we write back to those who haven't and make the point again. And that may be a choice that we would undertake as well. Now, the lists are planned to be helpful, and we try and get as many accommodation providers on that as possible. So there's that balance to strike. But interesting idea. And on the €50, I did ask about that because that again was raised last week. And so at Thalia and the campus living tell me that the cost there, for the one night accommodation, first of all, their view is that it's competitive vis-a-vis other university offerings. But secondly, there's a particular cost, again, around COVID. If you take one night, well, then there's a cleaning cost that comes in between the next guest coming in, and the cost, the €50 reflects that. So that's the justification for it. Again, maybe liaising directly with campus living. If there's any particular issues with it, let me know. We're trying to be as flexible as possible around the second semester. That's part of it, but I'm told that there is that cost of cleaning the accommodation in between, and what also contributes to that €50, and that's the explanation for it. And we don't, just to also say, the university doesn't set the fees, as we learned last year in the context of accommodation fees. The university itself doesn't set the fee. There's the company which runs Thalia has a commercial remit, if you like, and they set the accommodation fee. But what I'm told when I asked the question was the answer, in part at least, is that there's a significant cost of cleaning in between. And they're also pointing out the competitive nature of it vis-a-vis some of the other universities. And that's the answer that I have at the moment. But happy to revisit if needs be.
Thank you. And the other one I'm just going to ask real quick from the chat is from Casey. So how can you justify the 5,000 increase to her course as an international student when it went to online this year?
Yeah, I don't know which course that is. Maybe Casey might follow up on that afterwards. And maybe send me. I don't have an answer to that. That must be a specific course. The fees didn't increase generally, and obviously the fee was set in the context of the program rather than being online or not. So I don't know. As I say, don't know the particular program. So maybe if Casey would like to email me separately, there may be a particular answer to that I can then find out and maybe liaise with her. So president@nuigalway.ie finds me, and apologies towards the end that I can't answer that particular one because it relates, I'd say, to one particular course or a particular set of courses. That's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. So just a couple more questions. One of them was, is there any provision to do anything for students who are supposed to be studying abroad? And if not, can the university consider allowing students to decide for themselves if they would be willing to go abroad next semester rather than a blanket ban? The fact that it has already been decided should not shut down discussions on the possibility of this happening. It is such a big part of university life, and this year we've had to forgo that. Gramagat as the Friber.
Yeah, Gramagat. Yeah, this is one of a really tough one for us, and we thought about this in a number of ways. First of all, we didn't want to send students away to an experience that would be not be a real experience. So, say sending into locations where there are particular challenges with COVID, which would mean that the university did not have the same level of in-person contact, a bit like ourselves, and we're limited in that context. And secondly, even there might be restrictions more so even socially, so that the language experience would be very much diminished. And so that was one thing I was particularly keen on. What's the value in sending a student over, or allowing a student to go overseas even, in that regard? So thinking about the student experience. Secondly, again, we thought a lot about this. We were very concerned that, and this was back in September, and even then when we made the decision this semester about next semester, that we don't know what things will look like in February, and we don't know what they'd look like in March or April. So while we might ourselves be inclined to go, and a student might decide to go, things might change dramatically, and it might be a real issue, and it could well be a real issue that life, that the life in that context changes, and there. In some cases, there may be no support mechanisms. We were advised by Foreign Affairs that there may be issues around consular support in particular locations, again, where the advice wasn't to go in the first place. So we were really, again, very, we had a long discussion around this, and we took advice, and we agonized over it. And thirdly, then we felt, and this is our sense of responsibility to students, that we felt that even if a student makes a decision to go on his or her own, and makes all the arrangements and the risk assessment, if we find then that a student of NUI Galway is away and in difficulty, irrespective, we can't just say, oh, well, you decided to go and it's your problem. We still would feel a responsibility towards that student, and we would still feel the sense that we would need to do something to support the student. And we did, I know, particularly in the springtime, try to support students coming back as much as possible. And so even though technically speaking, a student could very well make a decision on very good grounds right now, a bit like we did in the summer around advising students to come to Galway, we based it on the best decision, best information we have. Even though you might make a decision right now, which makes complete sense and looks like the right decision to make, the tide might turn. You might find yourself in difficulty, and we would feel bad about that. And even though you have made the decision, we'd still feel responsible, and we thought the safest thing was in that case to take the decision we took, and to think about the timing. So again, for language students in particular, thinking about the timing of how language classes, and again, colleagues, huge alterations or changes there to the curriculum in order to facilitate that. But thinking then about the timing of the language experience, and having semester. Changes in semesters if people are going to go away in their fourth year, for example. So that's the rationale for it. I know that people might say, well, I'm happy to go, and that might be the case right now, and it might even be the case ultimately. But we just felt that with all the risk there was around absence of insurance, consular support, possible medical difficulties in location, we'd feel responsible, and that was that's probably the main reason why we made the decision. Just on the balance of risk and the caution that we were taking, and the best advice we had, as I say, from Foreign Affairs and elsewhere.
Kieran, just Keshtela. As mental health and well-being is now more important than ever for all students and staff, would it be possible to slow down the pace of delivery of modules online, just to give people more of a chance to slow down and kind of get more involved in sports and other hobbies? And I think particularly coming into semester 2, that would be something really important to consider.
Yeah, and this is something I think in general, there's an academic council meeting next week, and I think I'm going to raise this, and I'm sure the Students' Union as well, that the whole assessment and pace of delivery issue, as you say, is something we need to consider, probably more on a program basis as well as a module basis. So yes, I'll be raising that next week as something we need to think about. And again, with Michelle and other colleagues who are, and particularly at the college and school level, something we need to look at. I'd also think more about the synchronous, asynchronous opportunities. So again, for my class, we have the synchronous class, and people can ask questions in the chat and so on, or more generally. But every lecture is recorded, and it then goes straight onto Blackboard. It's just people can go back over it in their own time. And I'd also be inclined, and again, this is my own view as somebody who'd be involved in the teaching process, and this is not just this year but other years, going back to the original question around student engagement and student involvement in the learning process. I think we need to listen a lot to student feedback, and if we change our approach, if we cover a little bit less in the module or cover it in a different way, sometimes that's a learning experience in itself, and the sky won't fall in. So I think we need to, particularly in the current year, be a bit more agile, and I'm sure many colleagues are agile around the modules, because I think the learning experience is manifold. First of all, there are many different types of capacities that we need to encourage and nourish. But secondly, it happens outside the classroom as well, as in clubs and societies. It happens in interaction to the extent that it's possible, socially and so on. But thirdly, it also happens in the process. So it's not just what you teach, but how you teach it. And I think that sense of being tuned in to the lecture, and to the extent that, again, I can give that message from my own experiences, somebody who's been involved here as an educator in Galway, but also in 4 other institutions over a period of decades. That would be my approach, that we need to be attentive to the class and pace the program, the assessment on that basis. The sky doesn't fall in if we don't. And I think there's also that hope that we planned for that for second semester. So let's raise that at Academic Council, Emma, maybe next week as well as an issue.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. I think the whole concept of flexibility and being agile in the next semester will really be really important for the student learning experience. Just the final question I have. So can those of us who are in courses with subjects with practical elements who had their labs cancelled or moved online expect to have those labs run in person on campus next semester?
Yeah, so and I'm reluctant to answer. One of the things we learned, I think, in the autumn, and it was something that the September was particularly challenging for us all, was predicting the future. And I think one of the things we need to be cautious about, and I think learn from our learning institution. One of the things I've learned is that sense of living with uncertainty. So having that caveat, I would hope that the answer is yes, but we don't know where the virus will be, or the level it will be in February, March, April, May. You'd hope that whatever January, February might look like, that April and May might be different or better, either in the context of a vaccine or things being better in the context of the overall infection rate. So I'm sorry I can't give a better answer, and I've learned this, other than to say we hope that you will, and we'd hope to plan as soon as possible around that so that it could. But things change, as we knew in September, changes very rapidly. And again, our intention will be to plan around that, to accommodate and facilitate as much as we can so that it can happen. And also to be conscious, and in one of the messages we used, and we changed it since because we thought it was a bit ambiguous, but one of the messages we had was that the second semester will commence like the first. Because our feeling is that as the semester progresses, and particularly as we come towards exams, and there may be therefore in-person exams, again, planning around that, socially distanced, in-person, particularly in some modules or some programs where it's needed for accreditation purposes and so on. So as the semester progresses, we would hope that we'd be able to maybe build from there and do more. It'll be coming into the spring. The virus will have, hopefully the context will have changed. For several reasons. So I know it's a long answer, and I'm really sorry that I can't give a better one or more definitive one, But that's the thinking, is that hopefully yes, and we'll facilitate as much as we can to make sure that it can happen if it can. And the public health advice will dictate, as it has since the beginning.
The next question, I don't know if you somehow predicted it, was actually we keep hearing about the new normal and the popularity of working from home. Assuming a vaccine is widely available next year, what's going to be done to ensure staff return to campus for enough time to deliver face-to-face time and a proper balance of home/campus is reached?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's hard. I think. I think we've learned a lot, and it's been a very challenging time. But I also think we've learned a lot in COVID. One is that we always thought, there was this always, and it's been there for years now, is that online is the future. And I think we've learned, and I always thought this, that students come to university to be on campus as well as online, or as well as in classroom. And I think we need to learn from that. So I don't think online will ever replace. It's a different experience. The quality of the program and the qualification is the same, but the context around it is very different. And so therefore, I think one of the things we've learned is that online is part of the future, but is not the future. And I think we'd probably use technology a lot more effectively in 2020, 2021, 22 than we would have prior to COVID. And I think that's a learning experience. But that doesn't mean that things will be online to the same extent. I think, and this will happen in society generally, my sense from all staff meetings, from talking to colleagues, is people are actually keen to come back. People miss each other, miss the context, miss being on campus, miss the social aspect of work and so on. So I'm not sure it's going to be a big issue once things get better, and public health advice allows us to bring colleagues back and students back on campus. I think we have to work on it. We'll have to make sure that there's a health and safety issue, and that around that, and when there is, that it'll be addressed. But I do think there's a sense of enthusiasm for, and the other thing just to think about, this is a much broader point, is what was there before? Was that normal? Was that what life should have been like? Was the kind of way we dealt with the planet, the way we and our fellow the animals who are on the planet with us? Clearly COVID comes from that particular context. Was that normal? Was the pace of life normal? Was our commitment to and focus on work and work hours, was that normal? I think there's a lot of things we look at differently after COVID. But I think the issue around coming back on campus, and certainly for 21, 22, I think if there's a vaccine and the virus is much more under control than it is now, I think colleagues will be keen to come back, and where they're not, we'll try and support them in order to facilitate it. The other thing I've learned, and this is not a surprise, you're much better facilitating people than mandating them to do something or requiring them to do something that they don't want to do. And I think it's a much better, much more humane way to do things as well. So all of that, I think, means that after COVID, hopefully there's an after COVID, and if there is, I think colleagues would be keen to get back, not to a new normal, but to something that's hopefully more reflective, but nonetheless keen, and where there isn't that sense of enthusiasm, well, then understanding why and trying to facilitate in that context, I think, would be my approach.
Thank you. We know there's a massive issue with students feeling not connected to the campus. Students have asked, can we get a minimum of 1 day on campus at least for every student, so that they know what it feels like and like to come to, and this is especially from international students.
Yeah, so that's something, and I know that came up in the student council as well. Yeah, so I think, from talking to colleagues, and again thinking about semester 2, what we did was I did a tour of college executives, and we talked to heads of school in particular. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for that. I think part of the issue will be timetabling, and is there some way we can cluster it? Because I think that the challenge for us, if we've back on campus and there's an hour on a Monday and then an hour on a Thursday, much better, let's put those 2 hours together somewhere. But that's a real timetabling challenge, and we may have to again something to raise at Academic Council. We may have to come to that early because we found in September, to be honest, and you saw that when we tried to start issuing things like, the timetable and the expectations of what would be on campus and not. The timetabling system is creaking, and we found it really difficult. We ended up using spreadsheets and so on. And there's a particular project ongoing around the student pathways project around the technology supporting learning, but also hopefully timetabling. So it's something we need to plan ahead for early, and again, hopefully accommodating colleagues in that. And I would imagine if that's going to happen. So first of all, as I said before, if you're in semester 1, you're going to be in semester 2 on campus. And there's about 1,000 students a day on campus currently. But secondly, I'd likely again more to be towards the end of semester, longer days, better weather, possibility of outdoor events, for example, or outdoor activities. So all of that we would hope to plan towards, but certainly we'd need to plan in order to do that. So yes, I think it's a good idea. And trying to plan around it. It is a big exercise, but we'll try and do it if we can.
Perfect. Just final 3 now. We're on the final stretch. Cork colleges and UL have offered free COVID tests to all students before they go home for Christmas. Will NUIG do the same to make sure students feel safe for their families? Yeah, good question. Again, this came out. I know Parky raised this earlier when we met earlier in the week, and therefore, so I asked, two things on that. One is we've always liaised very closely with the HSE around what we would do with testing and contact tracing and so on, because I was always of the view it needed to be plugged into a system that could that was the system that was supposed to cope with it. So we've always been very closely working with and liaising with the HSE locally with public health, and so and we're talking to them about this, and I know Michelle again, who's in the vicinity of the meeting, if you like, on the call, has said that there'll be follow-up meetings this week, and if the HSE advise this, then we'll do it. So watch that space. Part of the challenge, and this is the second part of the answer I was going to give. Part of the challenge is the extent to which they take a view on the spread, the infection rate in particular locations. So from what I understand, the infection rate in Limerick and Cork was one thing higher than Galway, which triggered it. And secondly, they've been very careful. We talked to them a lot about student testing and on-campus testing, and whether we should test more broadly than we were, whether we should test on an ad hoc basis rather than targeted. And one of the main challenges they had was testing capacity, and they were moving resources from where they were needed to if we were just testing on an ad hoc or on an asymptomatic basis, we were moving resources possibly where they weren't needed. So that's the balance that needs to be struck. But to answer the question, we're talking to the HSE about that. We'll be advised by them, and if they advise it and if they facilitate it, we'll do it. And obviously there's a week left, so we need to make that decision quickly. So I don't know whether Michelle wants to add to that, but we'll certainly send a note out on it quickly if and when that's decided. Thank you. So this is just another one from the chat, but have you been in contact with Simon Harris over the issuing of refunds to international students, or partial refunds of any kind?
Yeah, no, this is an issue that's raised quite a bit. Yes, I mean we meet the minister quite regularly as the Irish Universities Association, and to come back to the original I mentioned earlier around the budget. So we've great hopes for the department, great hopes for the minister. He shows great commitment, as do his colleagues in the department. And one of the things we talked about very early on, and certainly I would have made a comment around, was again around student experience, the funding situation for students in need in particular. But as Park says, that's maybe a more general issue as well. So yes, we have. It's a policy issue, I suppose, at the national level, and we're conscious. And I'll come back to the international student. We're conscious in particular of the health care and medical costs for international students. And again, if we can do something around that, we will. So again, thinking about liaising with the Students' Union on that and making a decision in the context of non-EU students as it's categorised. I prefer to call those students international students, but a very important part of the university. And we know particular challenges this year, which we'll try and address separate from any arrangement the minister might make. So that's, but yes, liaising with the minister very closely. Yeah.
Thank you. So this one is just on nursing students. So it's been recently, highlighted the nursing students working in, healthcare settings. do you support the students being paid or given a stipend for their work and contribution, especially this year during a pandemic?
Yep, and I know this has been again in discussion in the Dáil, and I think the Taoiseach's response has been there's a working group set up in order to look at this. I would support that. I think again, learning from the pandemic and the COVID crisis, one of the things we've learned is that there are people in society who weren't valued enough, and healthcare workers are one of those. And so I would support. We're giving an honorary degree to Jean Kelly, who's just retired as the director of nursing in the hospital, the UHG, the hospital in Galway. And one of the reasons, many reasons why Jean's been doing great work for years, but one of the reasons why we've decided to honour Jean is to honour nursing in general, and she being a representative of that. So yes, I would support that campaign, support the direction of travel on that, and I know it was asked. I think asked at the again in the chat around the student council. Would the university pay this? It wouldn't be. The university wouldn't pay somebody working somewhere else. So it's a HSE healthcare issue and certainly a policy issue more widely. But to the extent that the university has a voice in it, I would support the direction of travel on it. I would support the case in the campaign. I think there are many people in society who are. We value more now than we did before, and nurses and nursing students are one of those groups.
Thank you, Kieran, and I appreciate answering that. And I think a lot of people would appreciate if you came out publicly in support of that, because I think your words carry weight in that.
Not as much as you might think, but yeah. Okay, I bear that in mind. We might do something with the nursing school as well around that. Yeah.
And just, will you come back to another Q&A next semester to kind of, to answer students' questions again, if possible?
Sure, yeah, and we might do it earlier. I mean, one of the things and I think, hopefully this has worked well for everybody on the call or on the line, so to speak. So, yep, I'd be delighted, and if we can do it, I don't know when we would do it, maybe 2 or 3 weeks into the semester. Very happy to do that. I just to go back to something I said earlier, I've been, and it's not for me to be pleased. It's for but I think it's taken and appreciative of the questions and the level of respect that's shown. And I take it that there's a virtually and otherwise open door. President at NUI Galway.ie. If you have any issues, if we can't deal with it, we'll find hopefully somebody who can. If we can't deal with it in general, hopefully we'll tell you why and explain why we can't. But part of the reason why I came on today, because I know really that things have been very challenging. We can't, as at the beginning, bump into each other on campus where we can bat the breeze and you can tell me how you're getting on. The Students' Union is doing really good work, and we really appreciate that. For yourselves, we really appreciate that it's been a very, very tough year. And this time last year, we launched our strategy, and as part of that, I was keen that we say it up front that we're here for our students. And while we may not always agree on how we might articulate that, we may not always have the resources that can articulate that to the extent that we'd like. I hope that we have the sense that we're all on the one page. This is a journey, a very important part of a journey through life for you. We're here to support you through that journey as much as we can. And if something like this is helpful, or if we can be helpful in other ways, that's a mission accomplished from my point of view. And very happy to have a Q&A 2 or 3 times next semester if needed. Very happy to do that. And if there are particular questions in the meantime that you'd like to raise, either through the Students' Union. We mentioned Academic Council quite a bit, so there's a meeting next week, and I think the general planning for semester 2, I think it'd be good to raise, at least raise the issues, put them on the agenda, and then colleagues can plan for them. We've pushed for governing authority to have more, and again, I was keen on this and would have proposed it, and I know the Students' Union is keen on it, governing authority to have more student representation. So in next governing authority, there'll be 3 student reps, potentially also in other areas like nominations from external parties. So the student voice is particularly important, and I hope today has been part of that, and conscious that if you need to leave anything from me, please do contact me, president@nuigalway.ie, and the SU gets good kudos at the end there. So thanks to Corrick, Roisin and Emma for facilitating this, and for working for students and giving students a voice this semester at a particularly important time, a semester like none we've ever had before. So thank you.
Thank you, Kieran, and thanks, as I said, everyone who involved on this. Roisin, Roisin, Emma, happy birthday, especially to Roisin and all the background team that were helping out today. And thanks for everyone who came on, sent in questions, especially people who came on to ask you questions. It's been good, and we hope to have this again next semester. So, so we've one more week. So good luck to everyone there.
Yeah, best luck for the rest of the semester and in any assessments you might have. I nearly said exams, but they're not always exams. And then finally, I hope I answered all your questions. You'll understand that some of the things, again, hopefully you learn in this context, that I don't have all the answers, but hopefully we'll be able to address them. And if there are any extra ones, just send them on either through Porrick or directly, and we'll try and address them as best we can. Thanks very much.
Happy Christmas, everyone.
Take care. Happy Christmas. Stay safe. Thank you.